Courage is born in imperfection because true bravery is not found in the polished, flawless moments of life, but in the messy, uncertain, and vulnerable spaces where we risk being seen as we are, with all our doubts, fears, and unfinished edges. And while we are often taught to prepare until we are ready to perfect ourselves before stepping forward, the reality is that waiting for perfection keeps us paralyzed, while courage grows only when we allow ourselves to act without guarantees, to speak even when our voice shakes, to try even when failure feels possible, and to show up even when we feel unworthy. And in those moments, we discover that imperfection is not weakness, but the soil where strength takes root, because nothing demands more courage than revealing ourselves without the mask of certainty, without the armor of control, and without the false promise of perfection. And when we think of the stories that have shaped us or inspired us, they are never about people who had it all figured out, but about those who dared to take the first step into the unknown, those who stumbled, those who fell and kept going, those who admitted they were afraid yet still acted, because that is the essence of courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward with it as a constant companion. And imperfection sharpens courage because it makes us face the truth that we cannot control outcomes, we cannot erase risk, and we cannot always predict how things will unfold. But we can choose to show up anyway, and in choosing to act within our limitations, we find strength far greater than any imagined perfection could give, because perfection is sterile, lifeless, untouchable, while imperfection is alive, real, and full of possibility. And it is in that reality that courage breathes, for it takes courage to admit mistakes instead of hiding them, to ask for help instead of pretending we can do it all, to confess when we don't know instead of pretending we do, and to keep going when we fall short instead of giving in to shame. And in those actions we find that courage is not about performance but about authenticity, about daring to be fully human in a world that often demands masks. And it is in the raw honesty of imperfection that we connect most deeply to ourselves and to others, because courage born of imperfection does not say, "Look at me, I have it all together," but instead whispers, "Here I am, flawed and learning, but present." And that presence is more powerful than any illusion of control, because presence allows growth, risk, discovery, and resilience. And when we think about the regrets that weigh the heaviest, they are rarely about trying and failing, but about never daring to try at all, never allowing imperfection to be the birthplace of courage, and instead letting fear dictate silence, inaction, or withdrawal. And the paradox is that by chasing perfection, we rob ourselves of the very growth that courage requires, because courage is a muscle built only through use, stretched by failure, strengthened by vulnerability, and expanded by each imperfect attempt. And as we practice this kind of courage, we learn that what once felt unbearable, risk, fear, doubt, becomes bearable not because they disappear, but because we become stronger in their presence. And so imperfection, rather than being an obstacle to courage, is the very invitation to it, because each imperfection asks us, will you still step forward? Will you still choose to be seen? Will you still act even though you cannot control the outcome? And when we answer yes, even trembling, even hesitant, we embody the truest form of courage, and over time those imperfect steps create a pattern, a life not of flawless moments, but of deeply human ones, marked by resilience, growth, and a bravery that perfection could never give, because perfection is an illusion, while courage born in imperfection is real, tangible, and transformative, shaping not only the path we walk, but the person we become along the way. Waiting is disguised fear, because so often when we tell ourselves that we are simply being patient, that we are holding back until the timing is right, or that we are waiting for one more sign of clarity, what we are really doing is masking hesitation and uncertainty with the language of preparation. And though it may feel safe to call it wisdom or caution, deep down we know it is fear in disguise, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of stepping into the unknown and being seen as not enough. And while fear is natural and human, when it hides behind the comfort of waiting, it robs us of progress, momentum, and the chance to grow, because the truth is there will never be a perfect moment to begin. There will never be a season where all doubts vanish and all conditions align. And if we spend our lives waiting for that imagined perfection, we will remain stuck in the same place year after year, mistaking stillness for strategy, convincing ourselves we are getting ready when in reality we are letting opportunities pass by. And the danger of this disguised fear is that it feels reasonable, it feels smart, it feels like self-protection, yet what it protects us from is not risk but possibility, and the longer we wait, the heavier the fear grows, because inaction feeds it, making the mountain taller in our minds while our confidence shrinks. And every time we choose to wait, we silently reinforce the lie that we are not ready, that we cannot handle what comes next. When in truth, readiness is rarely a prerequisite for action, but rather the result of it. And it is only when we step forward despite fear that we discover the strength, clarity, and skill we thought we lacked. So the more we act, the more fear is exposed for what it really is. A shadow that looks bigger than it is until light is shone upon it, and that light is movement, the decision to do the thing we have been avoiding, to start even when imperfect, to risk being seen without the shield of over-preparation. And when we choose action over endless waiting, we learn that fear cannot survive in motion, because the very act of doing dissolves its power, showing us that what we feared was often smaller than we imagined. And though it may not vanish entirely, it loses its hold each time we refuse to bow to it, and yet many of us stay caught in the cycle of waiting, telling ourselves that one more degree, one more book, one more plan, or one more season will finally equip us, when in reality the most important preparation comes through the courage of beginning, and this is why waiting is such a clever disguise for fear, because it looks like responsibility but functions like avoidance, and it whispers that standing still keeps us safe, when in fact standing still erodes our confidence and feeds regret, because the time we spend waiting is time we cannot reclaim. And the most painful regrets in life are not usually about the risks we took and failed, but about moments we let slip by because we were too afraid to step forward. So the challenge is to recognize waiting for what it is, to look honestly at the ways we hide fear behind excuses, and to ask ourselves if the waiting is truly necessary or if it is simply fear keeping us comfortable. And when we see it clearly, we can choose differently. We can choose movement. We can choose to begin messy and imperfect. We can choose to trust that the very act of stepping forward will teach us more than all the hours of hesitation ever could. And in that choice, we begin to dismantle fear's disguise, stripping it of its false authority, proving to ourselves that courage is not about waiting until fear disappears, but about refusing to let it decide the course of our lives. Because while fear thrives in waiting, courage thrives in action, and every time we replace hesitation with movement, we reclaim a piece of our power, reminding ourselves that the life we want cannot be built on delay. It can only be built on doing. Small steps are powerful steps, because while we often imagine that transformation requires dramatic leaps or monumental changes, the truth is that the most meaningful progress is usually built one small, consistent action at a time, and it is easy to underestimate these steps because they seem so simple, almost too ordinary to matter, but it is in the ordinary that the extraordinary is slowly formed. For every journey that looks impossible at first becomes possible through the steady rhythm of small movements that accumulate into something far greater than the sum of their parts. And when we think about the moments in our lives when real growth happened, they were rarely born out of one grand gesture, but instead from countless small decisions to keep moving forward even when the finish line was nowhere in sight. Because the power of small steps lies not just in the progress create, but in the momentum they build, momentum that carries us past fear, past self-doubt, and past the temptation to give up. And each small step, no matter how insignificant it may appear, is an act of defiance against stagnation, a declaration that we refuse to stay still. And this is why small Steps matter so deeply because they are sustainable, they are accessible, and they are within our control, and when we commit to them, we begin to rewire our own beliefs about what is possible, showing ourselves that progress is not reserved for the extraordinary, but is available to anyone willing to begin where they are with what they have. And as we continue taking these steps, we find that the very act of doing something small opens the door to doing something bigger, because each small action is a vote for the future we are building, a tangible reminder that change does not happen all at once, but through steady, deliberate effort. And this truth is freeing because it means we don't have to carry the overwhelming burden of achieving everything at once. We only need to focus on the next step, the next choice, the next action. And while the world often celebrates the big milestones, it is the countless small, unseen steps that make those milestones possible. And when we understand this, we stop dismissing small beginnings as insignificant and start seeing them as the most powerful form of courage and persistence, because it takes strength to keep showing up when the progress feels invisible. It takes patience to keep walking when the road ahead stretches far beyond our sight, and it takes faith to believe that the small things we do today will matter tomorrow. But this is the quiet work that builds resilience, the daily practice that transforms character, and the humble repetition that makes achievement possible. And even though the results of small steps are not always immediate, they are inevitable when we refuse to quit, because small steps compound, creating a momentum that builds day by day, habit by habit, until one day we look back and realize how far we have come. And often the greatest surprise is not just the external results, but the internal transformation. Because with every small step, we are teaching ourselves that we are capable, that we are stronger than the excuses we once believed, that we are worthy of the progress we are making. And in this way, small steps do more than move us forward. They reshape our very identity, turning us into people who take action rather than waiting for perfect conditions, into people who build discipline rather than relying on fleeting bursts of motivation, and into people who can face challenges without being overwhelmed, because we have trained ourselves to respond with steady persistence. And so while it may be tempting to chase after big, dramatic changes, the real power lies in committing to the small, steady, and consistent steps that carry us forward, because these steps, though humble in the moment, hold the weight of transformation, and they prove that greatness is not built in an instant, but through 1,000 small acts of courage that add up to something extraordinary. Action builds clarity, because so often we wait for certainty before we begin, telling ourselves that once the path is clear, once the doubts are gone, once we know exactly how things will unfold, then we will act. But clarity is not something that arrives in stillness. It is something that emerges only when we move, because it is through doing that questions find answers, directions reveal themselves, and confidence begins to grow. And while it is tempting to believe that thinking longer or preparing more will dissolve uncertainty, the truth is that no amount of planning can replace the lessons gained by stepping forward, even if that step feels shaky or incomplete. Because when we act, we receive feedback, we see what works and what does not. We discover strengths we did not know we had and weaknesses we need to address. And in this process, clarity begins to form, not as a perfect roadmap, but as a growing awareness of the next right step. And this is why action is so powerful, because it transforms fear of the unknown into understanding through experience. And it breaks the illusion that clarity is a prerequisite for action, when in fact action is the source of clarity. And the danger of waiting for certainty is that it keeps us stuck in cycles of hesitation, where ideas remain untested, dreams remain distant, and fear continues to whisper that we are not ready. But the moment we act, the fog begins to lift, because reality is rarely as overwhelming as the scenarios we create in our minds, and each step forward reveals details that could never have been predicted from a distance. And though the path may still feel uncertain, it becomes less intimidating with each action, because clarity is not about knowing everything, but about knowing enough to take the next step. And in this way, action becomes a form of courage, because it requires us to move before we have all the answers, to trust that clarity will come not through waiting, but through walking. And the beauty of this process is that clarity does not just help us understand the path. It helps us understand ourselves, because in action we discover what truly matters to us, what ignites our energy, what drains us, what feels aligned with our values and what does not, and these discoveries cannot be made in theory. They can only be made in practice, and so action not only clears the external path but also sharpens the internal compass, teaching us to trust our own capacity to navigate the unknown. And when we commit to this way of living, we begin to see that clarity is never final or absolute. It is fluid, it evolves as we move, and it grows in proportion to the risks we are willing to take, and the more we act, the more resilient we become in the face of uncertainty, because we no longer wait for perfect conditions, but instead learn to create momentum with what we have, and over time the fear of the unknown begins to lose its hold, because experience has shown us again and again that clarity always follows action, and though the path may twist, turn, or shift in unexpected ways, we realize that we are not powerless in the face of uncertainty, because our willingness to act gives us the tools to adapt, to learn, and to keep moving forward. And in this way, action becomes more than a means to clarity. It becomes a way of life, a habit of refusing to stay paralyzed by the need for perfect answers, and instead embracing the unfolding process of discovery, knowing that clarity is not something we wait for, but something we create each time we dare to begin. Regret grows in the space of waiting, because every time we choose hesitation over action, every time we let fear disguise itself as patience, and every time we convince ourselves that tomorrow will be a better day to begin, we allow opportunities to slip quietly through our fingers, and those missed chances do not simply vanish, they linger, they echo in the form of questions that follow us. What if I had tried? What if I had spoken? What if I had dared? And the weight of those questions often becomes heavier than any failure could ever be, because failure gives us lessons and growth, while waiting gives us nothing but the ache of possibility never explored. And this is why regret is born not out of risk but out of avoidance, not out of daring and losing but out of never daring at all, because waiting promises us safety but delivers emptiness. And though it may feel comfortable in the moment to delay, to prepare endlessly, or to believe that conditions are not yet perfect, time passes regardless, and the longer we wait, the less time we have to build, to create, to love, to attempt. And the irony is that waiting often feels harmless while we are in it, but it accumulates, silently turning into years of deferred dreams. And when we look back, what stings the most is not the things we tried and did not succeed at, but the moments we let slip away because we chose not to act. And the truth is that life never hands us the perfect time, because clarity and certainty are not prerequisites for action, they are the outcomes of it. Yet waiting convinces us to stay still until we feel ready, and in doing so we trade the chance to live fully for the illusion of control. And this trade is costly, because while fear fades with movement, it intensifies in stillness, making each next step feel heavier. And the more we wait, the more we believe that action is out of reach, that opportunities have passed us by, that it is too late to begin, and those beliefs become self-fulfilling, locking us in cycles of hesitation where regret quietly multiplies. And what makes regret so piercing is that it is irreversible, because once a moment is gone, it cannot be reclaimed. The chance to speak that truth, to pursue that goal, to connect with that person, or to take that leap will never return in exactly the same way. And though new opportunities may come, the old ones remain as shadows of what might have been, and these shadows remind us that waiting was never harmless. It was a choice with consequences, and while action may bring struggle, discomfort, or even failure, it also brings growth, resilience, and wisdom, while waiting brings none of these gifts, only the steady build-up of a life unlived. And when we carry regret, it does not come from the times we fell short, but from the times we chose not to try at all, because even in failure we know we were brave, but in waiting we know we surrendered to fear, and this knowledge sits heavy on the heart. So the truth is that the cost of waiting is always higher than the cost of trying, because regret stretches far beyond the moment we choose to delay. It echoes through the years, reminding us that we silenced our own potential. And while we cannot always control outcomes, we can control whether or not we act, whether or not we risk, whether or not we step forward. And when we refuse to act, Regret takes root, growing stronger each time we allow fear to dictate our choices. And in the end, it is not the things we did imperfectly that haunt us, but the dreams we never gave ourselves permission to chase because waiting feels like postponing. But in reality, it is denying ourselves the life we long for. And regret is the inevitable result of that denial, growing in the quiet spaces where action should have lived. Doing is how you honor your life, because existence itself is a gift that asks not for perfection but for participation, and every time you take action, no matter how small, you affirm that your time here matters, that your choices carry weight, and that you are willing to show up for the one life you have been entrusted with. And too often we forget this truth and slip into patterns of waiting, doubting, or hiding, convincing ourselves that we will start living fully once we feel ready, once we are stronger, once circumstances improve. But the act of waiting diminishes the very life we are meant to honor, while doing breathes life into it. And this doing does not have to be monumental. It does not have to look extraordinary to anyone else, because honoring your life is not about impressing others, but about stepping into what is possible for you. Whether that is beginning a project, speaking a truth, nurturing a relationship, pursuing a dream, or simply taking one step beyond the edge of your comfort. And when you do, you align with the essence of living instead of merely existing, because to honor your life is to recognize its brevity, to understand that time moves whether we move or not, and to choose action as a way of saying yes to your own existence. And in this way, doing becomes an act of reverence, a way of showing gratitude for the opportunities, abilities, and moments you have, even if they are imperfect, because life was never meant to be lived only in thought or preparation. It was meant to be embodied, practiced, risked, and expressed through the things we dare to attempt. And though fear will always be present, the act of doing transforms fear into fuel, reminding us that courage is not about being unafraid, but about being willing to step forward anyway. And every time you act, you reinforce the truth that your life is worthy of effort, worthy of risk, worthy of showing up for. And over time, this practice of doing creates meaning, not because everything succeeds or unfolds easily, but because you are willing to engage. And in that engagement, you discover that the act of living fully is not about achieving constant victories, but about refusing to remain passive. And when you do, you create stories that reflect the fullness of your humanity, stories of trying, failing, learning, rising, and trying again. And these stories become evident that you did not let fear silence you, that you did not let doubt keep you still, that you chose to treat your life as a gift by stepping into it with action. And this choice is not only about goals or achievements, it is also about honoring the people around you, the opportunities you have, and the potential within you that would otherwise remain dormant. And when you look back, what will matter most is not the plans you made or the dreams you held silently, but the actions you took, the risks you embraced, the steps you dared to walk, because each one was a declaration that your life is worthy of being lived now, not later. And in this truth we find freedom, because doing liberates us from regret, from the heaviness of untapped potential, and from the illusion that safety lies in waiting. And instead it anchors us in the present, reminding us that life is happening here, in this moment, and the only way to honor it is to meet it with action, with presence, with the courage to do something that reflects the fact that our days are limited and therefore sacred. And by choosing to do rather than wait, we live in a way that respects the fleeting nature of time. We create a life that bears witness to our willingness to participate, and we honor not just the opportunities before us, but the very gift of being alive.